Hey fam, welcome back to another episode of Cult Stuff and Chill, where we are not in person this week, but we're back to our regular bullshit. So welcome, welcome. I hear a needy boy over there. I met these two
Yeah.
cats last week, you guys, and I think I'm in love. Like, I love my cats, but those cats are also very great cats.
Didn't Onyx sleep with you?
Yeah, oh, it was so cute. So my own cats won't sleep with me. Um, they're girl cats, so I'm thinking it's just because, they're sassy little women. But when I was at Ashlee's place last weekend, one of her cats came and slept on the pillow like right above my head, and he was just like purring all night, and I was like, oh my god, this is such a sweet baby. I love them. I
He
did
said you could
decide.
hang.
Yes, I also decided that for those of you familiar with our cats are betrothed. So Onyx and Noodle are a love match, and then I don't know that they would actually get along. They would probably be a very volatile relationship. But I think that Edward and Goob would make a wonderful match because they're both just like roly poly, cuddly little babies. So
I feel like Onyx and Roomba would, no, Onyx and Noodle, they would be more of like business profesh.
mm-hmm.
Like, they would be like, that couple from, Chevy Chase's, what is it, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, the one that like, the, like, skiing couple.
Yeah. They would have like the matching windbreaker suits for when they're skiing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're like a little bit bitchy.
And they like just constantly harp on each other, but they're like, don't disrupt our space.
Mm-hmm. That's very much the vibe for sure.
Whereas Edward and Gooba would be Clark Griswold.
Yeah,
And isn't it
definitely.
Claire?
I think
I
so.
can't remember.
Yeah.
It's a blonde chick.
The only one that we
Not
could
important.
remember is Clark. He's the important one.
I'll have to admit, I haven't seen that in a really long time. And
That used to be like family tradition for us, but then we all moved, and so it's been like 6 years since we've watched that on Christmas, which is a little sad, but that's, adulthood. We don't live at home anymore. My brain is like not fully functioning today, and for those of you watching and not listening, you're probably thinking, wow, she just didn't even try today. And you're right. I didn't brush my hair. I didn't wash my face. I did brush my teeth, but then I immediately started drinking coffee. But I just could not be fucked today, so sorry, not sorry.
you
This
still be
camera
looking
is
cute though.
Thank you. This camera is not in high enough definition that I really gave it. You can't even see my acne really. So unless I like move my bangs to the side, then you're like, oh yeah, there's a pimple up there. But hey, that's okay. We all have pimples sometimes.
Speaking of pimples, did you want to read your little bub memes?
Oh, okay. So I don't know. Have we brought up little Bubby Child on this podcast yet?
I don't think so.
There is. I'm sure it's in more places than just on TikTok, but I hadn't run across them until TikTok. And for some reason, my story today really heavily reminds me of little Bubby Child memes, not because these people are like stupid or anything, but because basically little Bubby Child memes poke fun at people from the deep south, and the people in my story are from Mississippi, Louisiana, and so like I picture their voices as the little Bubby Childs. So Ashlee, I'm gonna send these to you so you can see these. The first one is, this is how I picture the boy from our story here today, and I think this is the one yes, okay. This is how I'm picturing him, Bobby Dunbar, when we get to it. So it says, sometimes I wish I was a feral child, wild and free. And it's very much like a little boy with a rat tail, that kind of reminiscent of Bobby Hill, but he's howling to the moon with a couple of wolves. And then this is the other one that makes me think of little Bobby Dunbar. And you know what? It reminds me of Bobby Dunbar so much that at no point is it ever referenced as little Bobby Dunbar, but I have subbed in Little Bubby Child for Little Bobby Dunbar. And then there's this one, which is just an all-time favorite for me too. Where it goes, one time we found a 6-pack of Surge in the woods next to the Pentecostal church, and my cousin Derwin drank them all and seen God. So once we get to the story, maybe I'll lend a little more context to why this reminds you of Bobby Dunbar, but
This week, I was watching Loki, which great series, Chef's Kiss. Recommend it. This will not have any spoilers, except for maybe a little bit of one. But I'm obsessed with alligator Loki.
He's so cute.
It's adorable. That has nothing to do with anything. The superhero thing, though, I was like thinking, okay, like where did superhero stories originate from? Like, there has to be an origin point for everything. Like, somebody one day wasn't just like, I'm going to write comic books, you know? So my story today is about a possibly interdimensional being that was really just in it for the chaos, and also kind of spurred the creation of pulp fiction and comic book superheroes. I'll start in early 19th century England during the Regency period into the Victorian period. Think like Pride and Prejudice, Wuthering Heights, that whole time period. But not everything was Mr. Darcy and dumb bitches named Kathy. There was also a lot of talk of spooky ghosties floating around the streets of London. So ghosts such as the Hammersmith ghost and the Southampton ghost just wreaked havoc, causing chaos on the local populations. They would assault people who were out on their nightly strolls. However, none were as fearsome or as widespread as Spring-Heeled Jack. The first sightings of Spring-Heeled Jack were in London around 1837, so now we're kind of getting more into the Victorian period, very early Victorian period. The first attack was on a servant girl named Mary Stevens. She was walking to Lavender Hill, which, side note, kind of sounds like a gay club. Like,
He does.
the name for a gay club.
But like a classy one.
Yeah. Like one that is very like chintzy, but
Like the drag queens are like in burlesque outfits.
Yeah.
With the little big like feather fans. Like very, very classy, but like it knows what it is.
Like Violet Chachki.
Oof, yes.
So Mary, she's walking to Lavender Hill, where she worked. During the trek, she was assaulted by a strange figure who leapt at her from an alley, grasping her so tight she couldn't move, kissing her on the face, ripping her clothes, and grabbing her titties with his claws. And she described the claws as cold and clammy as those of a corpse.
Ooh, gross.
Understandably, during this attack, she got pretty freaked out. She started screaming for help, which made the attacker flee, because then some very brave townspeople came and they ran to her aid. The people, they immediately started looking for the assailant, but they couldn't find him. He had completely disappeared. Everybody's like, all right, that was fucking weird. On to the next day. The next day, the phantom attacker used what would later become one of his signature moves for the first time, wherein he jumped in front of a carriage, causing the coachman to lose control, crash, and he actually got severely injured. It was reported by several witnesses that the character, after having done this, escaped kind of this mob that was forming, because they just saw a carriage crash. It's like a car crash, like people are going to help. So they saw the character escape from this sort of like mob of people by springing over a 9-foot high wall, not just like climbing, not just like scaling, like jumping over it.
Holy crap.
All the while cackling in a high-pitched and ringing manner. These attacks kind of grew, and more people were becoming affected. A few newspapers had kind of reported on the events, and they coined the name of this character as Spring-Heeled Jack because of the springing nature of how you'd usually escape. But it wasn't like really hitting like mainstream. It was just like a few smaller newsletters here and there. A few months later, on January 9th, 1838, in a meeting, the mayor of London, Sir John Cowan, revealed that an anonymous complaint had been filed to him, wherein it was written, "It appears that some individuals, of, as the writer believes, the highest ranks of life, have laid a wager with a mischievous and foolhardy companion that he durst not take upon himself the task of visiting many of the villages near London in 3 different disguises, a ghost, a bear, and the devil. Moreover, that he will not enter gentlemen's gardens for the purpose of alarming the inmates of the house. The wager has, however, been accepted. The unmanly villain has succeeded in depriving 7 ladies of their senses, 2 of whom are not likely to recover, but to become burdens to their families. At one house, the man rang the bell, and on the servant coming to the open door, this worse than brute stood no less dreadful figure than spectre-clad most perfectly. The consequences was that the poor girl immediately swooned and has never recovered from her senses. The affair has now been going on for some time, and strange to say, the papers are still silent on the subject." This writer has reason to believe that they have the whole history at their finger ends. Thorough, interested motives are induced to remain silent. So basically what this is saying, Spring-Heeled Jack, he had basically turned several women hysterical or catatonic by playing these pranks in which he would just like run up and scare the shit out of them and, mess with them, rip their clothes, whatever. But it's believed that he is either a nobleman or a friend, like an acquaintance of a nobleman who's causing mischief because of a wager of some sort, and it's just kind of gone too far. And that likely someone of affluence was paying these newspapers to stay silent. Like, they would write a letter about it, and someone would say, no, like, don't publish that. The mayor, John, at this point, he hadn't really heard of this. This is, like, the first he's hearing about it, and he's like, can you believe this bullshit? Until other members of the meeting were like, no, dog, like, the servant girls of London, they've been on edge. They've been talking about horrible attacks and these pranks, being pulled by a dreadful ghost or devil of some sort. Sometimes a dude in a bull or, like, a bear costume. The mayor, John, he was still skeptical until this conversation that they had, because I think it was like an open meeting, it was published in the Times, and an influx of letters came into his door from all over London about similar attacks. Like, oh yeah, I got attacked by this dude. Like, I got attacked by this dude too. That several more young women had been sent into dangerous fits, had been sent into catatonic states, and were severely wounded by the claws that the miscreant wore on his hands. Some victims were claimed to have died of fright, or in even one case, one victim was claimed to have drowned after Spring Heel Jack had scared her or pushed her off a bridge and she had fallen into a sewer and drowned. But none of those claims can be substantiated from the time.
So at this point, do they think it's like a person, or do they think it's a monster? Or are they unclear and it's just like a bunch of weird rumors going around?
They're not sure if it's just men being shitty and just like assaulting women, and women are kind of attributing it to that, because that's also very possible.
Right.
That could be one of the causes of it. The mayor, John, he was like, this is stupid. It's just people playing pranks. Like, people are probably just exaggerating. They're probably copycats. Like, one got in the paper at one smaller town, and then, it kind of spread around, and people are starting to talk about it. Because it was very much like an early urban legend where people were like, oh, Spring Heel Jack. It got down to where they were like using him as kind of a boogeyman, where they're like telling their kids, like, don't leave your bed at night because Spring Heel Jack will get you.
Yeah.
John, he was like, yeah, no, this is just exaggeration. Until someone that he trusted told him that one of their servant girls had been scared into inconsolable fits by a figure in a bear's skin. So after he heard that story, he's like, you know what, this is serious. As is custom, white men love to protect white women. So that's the point when he decided to launch an investigation into Spring Heel Jack. He was offering a reward for information or for capture of the individual or individuals responsible for the attacks. Over time, Spring Heel Jack kind of took on different forms and operated in different ways. Like I said, he was often seen wearing like either a bull skin and bull horns, so basically he looked like Batman, or like a figure in a cloak. Sometimes he would take the figure of a ghost, a devil, or a bear. One report from Sussex reports on an event wherein a gardener was working and distracted by a growl from which a bear or some other four-footed animal jumped out at the gardener, climbed the garden wall, ran along it on all fours, jumped down, and chased the gardener around the garden for a good long while. After the monster felt like the gardener had gotten a good enough workout, it jumped back over the wall and escaped. Again, springing over it, not just like climbing.
He was trying to make sure that gardener got his steps in that day.
In another attack, Jane Alsop, a teen girl, was attacked one night when, upon hearing a knock, she opened the door to her father's house, where a cloaked man claiming to be a police officer asked her to scurry along and get him a light. He thinks he caught Spring Heel Jack in their lane. So Jane, police officer asked for something, you're going to go get it. So she went and got a candle, handed it to the police officer, and when he took the candle, he threw off his cloak and presented a most hideous and frightful appearance. Eyes resembling red balls of fire, wearing a large helmet and tight-fitting clothing resembling white oilskin. He vomited blue and white flame from his mouth.
No.
And he put that bitch in a headlock, and he began tearing at her like gown, her neck, and her hair with his what she described as metallic claws. So obviously she starts screaming.
Yeah.
Her sister runs, goes to help her. She ran down and saw that this assailant was attacking her sister. And upon Spring Heel Jack seeing her sister, he fled the scene. Because it seems like he has a MO where he can really only operate on one person at a time. As soon as another person comes up, he bolts. So Jane actually sustained some more serious injuries. She had some scratches. She had hair just straight up yanked out of her head.
Ooh, yikes.
Obviously, she lived, and I think she mostly kept her senses about her. She didn't get sent into fits. However, in another case, 9 days later, same area, teen Lucy Scales and her sister were returning home from visiting their brother, and they were passing down Green Dragon Alley, which kind of sounds like a Harry Potter street.
It does. Fun fact, my high school mascot was the Green Dragons, so...
While they were strolling, they noticed a tall, thin, gentlemanly person wearing a large cloak, and as they passed this gentleman, he spun around, again, vomiting blue flames into Lucy's face, which basically just sent her into a seizure. And she was in these fits for hours. Her sister, basically just had, hold her up. The character fled, and then I think they were close enough to their brother's house that the girl that was not having fits was screaming for help, and their brother came and picked her up. So she was taken care of pretty much immediately, but it did cause her to basically have a seizure, which is a lot of these women are documented as falling into fits. So it's what was going on that these people were.
You know who this character reminds me of is Hades off of the Disney movie Hercules, with the blue flames and the claws and the robes and being kind of ugly.
Police, they're still doing their investigation. They didn't get many leads in it, however, except for one in this case specifically, where one Thomas Milbank was allegedly boasting right after the attack that he was Spring Hill Jack. He was at a bar, probably drunk, just yeah, I'm Spring Hill Jack, bitch. And obviously, he might not have known that this girl had been attacked, or these other, the two girls had been attacked, so he might have just been boasting about something he didn't know anything about. So he was arrested, he was questioned, got as far as going to trial, and originally things weren't looking so good for him. He actually had a white overall set and a heavy cloak at home, that when they searched his house, they found him, and they're oh, this is kind of what one of the girls described Spring Hill Jack wearing. But eventually they decided that he wasn't actually Spring Hill Jack when they kind of brought up the whole, how did you vomit fire? And he's I have no idea. Which is you're just taking his word for it. Regardless, he's I don't know how I do that. That's too much. I'm not Spring Hill Jack. I was just being a fucking liar.
Just fucking around.
So they let him go. There was an attack on a young servant boy who reported answering the door at his place of work and found a hideous cloaked monster. Now, this is one of the very first clues to the possible identity of Spring Hill Jack. He said that the cloaked monster had a cloak which had a family crest on it emblazoned with a W. The police took that. They're oh, wow, this is the first time we have any sort of clue. Mm-hmm. Kind of also going off of the previous report where they speculated it was someone of noble birth or one of their friends. They could have given them this cloak to use in these things. So at this point, Spring Hill Jack was getting pretty popular. This was getting into the Penny Dreadful era, and he was a common anti-hero in these stories. He had a whole, I think it was a 47 episode Penny Dreadful series about him, and other smaller Penny Dreadfuls, which are basically kind of proto comic books. Mm-hmm. They just have stories, and you read them, less illustration, more words, but you kind of get the drift. There's also plays, street plays, in theater plays, obviously not a Broadway situation being written. And then there was the newspaper articles that were documenting the actual attacks that were happening. But the more romanticized and fantasized part of him was that he was actually out here fighting crime, kind of a proto Batman. He was out avenging women and
come on,
trying to save them. So more of a crime fighter than a crime perpetrator. He's more of a vigilante in these stories.
Meanwhile, he's taking his clammy hands and grabbing people's titties, so.
Yeah. As he was becoming more popular in the media, people, they wanted to meet him. They're yeah, I want to see, they're going out on Spring Hill Jack hunts. They're let's find this guy. Let's meet him. I want to shake his hand. Because they kind of got wrapped up in the drama and the the romanticism of it all. So he got a little bit shy at that point. He stopped making public downtown London appearances. However, he did sort of pivot into more of his coach hijacking phase, where again he would run out in front of the coach, scare the horses, derail the carriage, flip it over or whatever, and then he wouldn't really steal anything. He would just do it for the lulz and then skip away.
It's his art pop era.
Reports of his appearance at this time described him as looking as the very image of the devil himself, with horns and eyes of flame. So again, kind of going into that Batman, like almost Mothman too.
Yeah.
Where he has like bright red eyes, he's got horns, and he's got like flappy cloak or wings or something. And basically, like, the illustrations that you see in these Penny Dreadfuls and newspaper articles, it really makes him look like old-timey Batman. Mothman had a baby with, like, the personality of the Joker.
This is, like, very much Werewolf in London territory for me, except for it'd be, like, Mothman in London. He's just out there acting up.
He really do be out there acting up. Because it's not even, like, there weren't really any reports of people actually getting hurt.
Yeah.
Like, they would get sent into catatonic states, but was that him, or was it the fucking lead paint, like,
right.
and arsenic in the wallpaper? Because that was also a problem. Mm-hmm. Side note, have you seen like hidden killers of history or something, where it's like a chick that goes through and she's just like, oh yeah, these are all the things that like were extremely poisonous throughout the decades and centuries?
Yeah, but her, and then there's, God, I can't remember the name of this channel, but they're like, do deep dives on like Victorian lifestyles, and like, well, this is all the stuff that could have killed you, and this is the medicine they would treat you with. And it's like they go into these Victorian recreated village and everyone's like dressed up, and then there's this one episode in particular where they go into like an old-timey like apothecary, and they're like mixing up all the herbal medicines and stuff, and like with ingredients that probably would have killed you nowadays, but
they're like, oh, you're getting arsenic poisoning from your wallpaper, here, take some arsenic for it.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm very into, gosh, so that one, and then like the historic costuming videos, I'm very into right now. So
those are really, they're almost like ASMR though, where they're just like going through and like quietly explaining how to get dressed. Although I kind of like the ones where it's like a day in the life of a slave woman, just like kind of calling these out, and it's like, so the slave woman would have woken up at this time. And
I wish I could remember the name of this channel in particular, but I think we're thinking about the same one. But it's one woman in particular that does a lot of videos about day in the life of a slave. And sorry, I have to look her
and it's
up.
not all slaves, it's like indentured servant, like basically slave labor.
I'm looking her up because I really do like her, so I want to give her a shout out here. It is Not Your Mama's History, and she does it. So, for example, the first one that pops up is a day in the life of an enslaved lady's maid. An enslaved lady's maid. So she, like, goes through that. And it's like a 15-minute video. But she's got a bunch of them on there. So it's pretty interesting if you guys want to go give it a watch.
At the beginning of the 1870s, Spring-Heeled Jack was traveling all over the UK. He was staying in Peckham and being identified as a Peckham ghost, and in Sheffield as the Park ghost. Both instances were later changed their story that it was actually Spring-Heeled Jack. And they'd be like, oh yes, Spring-Heeled Jack is back. In August of 1877, a group of soldiers at the Aldershot garrison reported seeing a peculiar figure coming at them. A soldier issued a challenge to the figure, but the figure just kind of ignored him, got all up in his grill, and just, like, smacked the ever-loving shit out of him.
Oh, no.
So another guard that was with him actually started shooting at the mysterious figure, and it just kind of, like, sprung off cackling, seemingly unscathed by the bullets. This caused, like, an absolute panic for the soldiers of the garrison. They're like, how could we let this happen? So they actually were issued more rounds of live ammunition, and they were ordered to shoot the night terror on sight, after which any and all reports of Spring-Heeled Jack ceased. So this is why this particular sighting is often attributed to maybe just one of the soldiers playing a prank on his fellow soldiers, and as soon as he realized that he was actually might have gotten shot, he is like, oh no, I don't want to die. So, but nobody really knows for sure, and some people think that the guy that shot at the first perpetrator was shooting blanks, or, you know, he had blanks for some reason. So, autumn of 1877, Spring-Heeled Jack made some of his final appearances in Lincoln, Lincolnshire, wearing a sheepskin. He was accosted by an angry mob who again shot at him, again to no effect. Spring-Heeled Jack sprung out of the situation, cackling as usual, never to be seen there again. And lastly, by the end of the 19th century, the reported sightings of him were really slowing down. He just wasn't as much of a figure. People weren't thinking about him. They were thinking about other shit. He was sighted on the rooftop of St. Francis Xavier's Church in Everton.
That's such a superhero move. I'm picturing, like, his silhouette, like, against the moon and, like, the cape flapping in the distance.
I'm picturing him, like, in a, like, T-pose, just, like...
Yeah.
Kind of like V for Vendetta, you know? Where she's, like, on the roof. And he had a few other appearances in the Liverpool area, because I guess Everton is by Liverpool. But for the most part, his appearances had slowed down and pretty much stopped by the beginning of the 20th century. No one was ever identified as Spring-Heeled Jack, but there are some theories as to who or what he might have been. Some people say that he was merely an effect of mass hysteria. They thought that because men were just absolute garbage, were out here assaulting women pretty much all the time, that women would, like, say, oh, it was Spring-Heeled Jack, when really it was just, like, a dude, and, like, they were so traumatized that they just kind of saw this ghastly figure. Or there's any reason that they could have identified this dude like that, or dudes. They thought that people seeing him springing and jumping over stuff was really just him, like, scaling a wall real quick and running away. Grossly over-exaggerated. That's what the mayor of London thought. Like, he's like, this is just an exaggeration. People were looking for clout at the time and get their name in the stories. Some people think that specifically it was an Irish nobleman, Henry de la Poer Beresford, the third Marquess of Waterford, kind of calling back to the evidence of the family crest with a W on it from earlier, or one of his associates. Now, Henry had had run-ins with women, police. He had drunken, disorderly conduct. He had just overall chaotic, like, very, like, charlatanish behavior. There was, like, one incident where he was, like, going to court and he wore a bear skin with some of his friends. Like, some of the Spring-Heeled Jack sightings had been identified wearing. And God knows that he had money for, like, springy shoes. He could have easily developed something. I'm picturing, like, remember moon shoes?
Yeah.
Like those big platform things? Like, that's what I'm picturing.
Like old-timey moon shoes. I'd love to see the steampunk version of that. So someone come up with steampunk moon shoes, because that's about how I'm picturing it.
But more springy.
Yeah.
In 1880, the Marquess was actually named as a perpetrator by one E. Copham Brewer, who said that the Marquess used to amuse himself by springing on travelers unawares to frighten them, and from time to time others had followed his silly example. However, to say that he was responsible for all of these isn't possible, because he actually died in a riding accident in 1859. Either the later ones weren't him or were just copycats. Some people think that Spring-Heeled Jack was actually a demon, a superhuman, a time traveler, or the Mothman. Maybe he was a creature summoned by practitioners of the occult, or an alien from a high-gravity world, so that's why he could jump. Some think that he was just a dude with thick cankles, because it's reported when people try to recreate his stunts, they would, like, break their ankles.
Maybe he's going to get drafted into the old-timey UK Olympic team.
Or the Avengers.
I like that even better, honestly.
And lastly, some people just thought this was a case of, like, again, kind of mass hysteria, but a phantom attacker, where someone may have just been, like, hallucinating or psychotic. Again, there was a lot of chemical and environmental contaminants and pretty much everywhere, so it's not really beyond it to think that people might have just been hallucinating. And, like, not that I want to blame people, but, like, there is a chance, especially if these people are being sent into fits by sightings and, like, are they might have been tearing their own clothes or hair or whatever, just, like, having basically a psychotic break. Mental health was not treated basically at all. You just got sent to a poorhouse or something and locked up for the rest of your life. It wasn't treated well. And in cases where multiple people viewed the same thing, some people think that it might have just been, like, a piece of canvas being blown by the wind, that, like, especially in the carriage situations where it's just, like, a piece of, somebody's laundry got loose and was being blown, scared the horses. Because horses are very easy to scare. Even, like, carriage horses probably during that time, if they got a big black piece of canvas flying at their face, they're like,
not about it.
So, regardless of where he came from, where he went, we have him to thank for superheroes, mass vigilantes, Comic-Con, urban legends, and maybe later Mothman.
An icon. While going through my story, for some reason, the only way that I can picture this Bobby Dunbar child is as little Bubby meme kid with a rat tail. So anytime I have to, like, reference something that's being said, just, like, picture it in the little Bubby child voice. I'm going to be telling you about the strange and mysterious case of the disappearance of little Bobby Dunbar. So, our story begins on Friday, August 23rd of 1912. We love a historical story. So, little 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar, he was, along with his family, they were all staying at this cabin in Louisiana on Swayze Lake. And being that it was Louisiana, it was really like more of a swamp house than a lake house. I'm not here to roast their vacation home. That's just like a fun little detail that becomes somewhat important later, is that they're at a lake house, but it's like surrounded mostly by the bayou swamp area. This was like a family affair. It includes the whole Dunbar crew. I think in total there was 11 people, so adults and kids included. It was like the Dunbar family plus some family friends. So it included Bobby's parents, Leslie and Percy, Bobby's little brother, Alonzo, and then several other, like I said, friends and family.
What a stupid fucking name. I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah. So it's a very strange mix. So we got Leslie and Percy, who their names rhyme, so like very cute. And then they have our son Bobby and then Alonzo. August of 1912. Percy Dunbar, Bobby's father, he ends up leaving the family for work, which breaks little Bobby's heart because he's like a big daddy's boy. And so what is a pissed off 4-year-old to do other than throw a huge fucking tantrum about it? So during this like toddler fit of rage, Bobby ends up breaking a strap of his straw hat. So anyway, that sounds really irrelevant, but just remember that little tiny detail for later. That day, Percy had gone to work. Leslie, Bobby's mother, she was preparing for a fish fry and probably also like bitching about her husband leaving her with all the kids at a cabin in the fucking swamp when Bobby was throwing a tantrum. But, you know, what's the man to do but fuck off for the day? Bobby, eventually he decides he's done with his tantrum and he wants to go off into the swamp forest with Paul Mizzy, who is a family friend who was also on the trip. And they were going to go out and shoot garfish, which actually I think we talked about garfish on the Nessie episode too, but they're big old fishies. They were out in the swamp bayou. And this really wasn't that strange of a request for them because Paul, again, he was a family friend of Bobby and he would take him on little family excursions to go like horseback riding and even had a nickname for Bobby that was Heavy. So he used to call Bobby Heavy, which seems a little mean.
Fatty McFatterson.
Fatty McFatterson, yeah, exactly. Bobby's mom allows Bobby to go off into the woods because she's honestly probably at this point like fed up of being the backbone of the family and needed a fucking break. Paul rounds out Bobby, his little brother, and all the rest of the boys on the trip, and they all head off into the spooky swamp woods to go fish hunting, also known as fishing. Later, this group of boys, they're called back to the camps for lunch, so they start to make their way back from their fishing spot to the woods, and from here the details get kind of fuzzy. So Paul, he recalls that their hike to the cabin, Alonzo is on his shoulders and he's joking with Bobby saying, "Get out of the way, Heavy, or I'll run you over." Bobby's response, again, he's 4, and so people report that this is his last words, and apparently was very characteristic to his personality trait. Apparently he was most affectionately a little shit, but like in a loving way, if that makes sense. So he was just like a little firecracker. And he tells Paul, "You can't do it. You ain't no bigger than me." And so when they return back to camp, Leslie realizes that her son Bobby is no longer with the group and is missing. And Paul pretty much probably felt like a douche, or he murdered him. Really, it's one or the other. We don't know. Mrs. Dunbar, Bobby's mom, and then Paul, they frantically start to call out for Bobby, and at one point, Leslie, she faints into the dirt because her kid's missing, her husband dipped out on the family vacay, and now her kid's gone. So it's all just too damn much. She needs a nap. She passes out because she's just overwhelmed. As the search progresses, there's 3 men from the group. They begin to search north of camp. There's a wagon trail. So this is the trail that Mr. Dunbar had taken to get to work. So while they're searching up there, they run into Percy, aka Bobby's dad, on his way back from his day of work, who obviously freaks out. He races back to camp when he hears that Bobby's disappeared. And by that night, still no trace of Bobby. Searchers begin to look for Bobby's body. You know, it was different times, but to me, it seems like they didn't waste any time assuming that he was dead and looking for a body. They just automatically assume he's lost in the wilderness, so now we're going to assume he's dead. But anyway, What they do is they take dynamite to blast through the lake, which I guess the idea here is either they're trying to blast the water out of the lake to find the body, or they're trying to disturb the water so that it would turn up his body if it had gotten stuck somewhere. Which realistically, that's probably the more likely scenario. They're not like blasting all the water out of the lake.
Yeah, like he might have gotten drugged down by an alligator,
Yeah.
or he might have got like stuck under a log or something, so they're trying to blow up whatever so that his body will float to the surface.
See, this sounds a little counterintuitive to me because I feel like you'd be stirring so much up in the lake that it would be harder. But again, I've never done search and rescue for dead bodies in lakes before, so what do I know?
Also, I feel like for rednecks, any chance that they have to use dynamite, like...
They're gonna take it. They're blasting dynamite in the lake, but they're also like dredging it with a thick cable that has like massive hooks stretched across the length. So they're like dragging these cables behind boats to try and like hook something. And again, this is just weird to me. Like they didn't even wait a full 12 hours before they were like, nah, he's dead. We better drag that lake. And like, there's just no faith here at all that he's still alive. Anyway, so after the night's over, they've thrown the dynamite, they've dredged the lake. The divers, they decide after they're done, putting explosives in the lake that they'll go in and start like searching coves and like little hooks that were unable to be reached by the boats and dynamite. Because Bobby's body had not been recovered in the lake, the searchers start to believe that he could have been killed by an animal. So this is going to go back to the alligator theory that you came up with. Of course, in the bayou, the most logical likely predator would be an alligator. They do what they think is the next best step, and they start to hunt and kill the alligators, and they slice those bad boys open, and they're just like trying to find Bobby's remains in their bellies. And this is not fruitful. Again, though, there's a lot of alligators in a swamp, so the chances of them getting to every gator is pretty unlikely.
Okay, side note, this reminds me of the story of the kid that like got snatched by a gator at Disney World.
Yeah. Oh, that's really sad.
Yeah.
But there was also this one video that went around recently of this gator that, like, this guy is taking his little tiny puppy on a walk, and he goes past this little lake, and then this gator comes out of the lake and grabs onto the dog. But this guy, absolute fucking legend, hops into the lake, punches the gator, grabs the puppy lives, the gator is punched and back in the lake, and this man is like, yeah, fucking bet. You take my dog, I'll show you who's boss.
Okay, another really quick side note. This was on TikTok the other day, and I think I might have sent it to you, where there's, like, just a gator out in the middle of the fucking road, and this girl is, like, trying to get it off the road. And, like, as I was watching that video, I was like, she's not going to get that gator off the road because she doesn't have a gator stick.
She doesn't have a gator stick.
Because it's, like, I don't know if it's from watching Steve Irwin, or whatever, but, like, everybody knows. I thought everybody knew that you had to take a stick, put it in the gator's mouth, have it clamp onto that, and then drag it by its tail so it's, like, preoccupied with a stick in its mouth. And no sooner had I had that thought, of course she's not going to get off the road. She ain't got no gator stick. And this man comes out of another car with a gator stick.
You either have to have your car machete or your gator stick. You have to be prepared for that. Yeah, both. Can you have, like, a machete on a long stick?
Okay, wait. What about a scythe?
Ooh, yeah, that would be the best. Because then if they act up to you and start to attack you, you can be like, nope, there goes your head. The search continues, and by Saturday, so literally the next day, less than 24 hours from his initial disappearance, there's about 500 people that are out searching the swamp for Bobby. And so these searchers, they are bona fide scientists, and they even did a test. So they took a straw hat with a broken strap like the one that Bobby had to test how long it could float. So they found that it could float pretty much uninhibited for hours, leading searchers to believe that there should have been at least some evidence of Bobby being in the lake if he was in there, because his hat, again, wasn't strapped to his head. So if he had been in the lake, their theory is that they would have at least seen that hat floating somewhere to indicate that he had drowned there. At this point, they pretty much had ruled out drowning because, again, by their logic, they would have either found a body or they would have found his hat somewhere floating in that swamp. After days of searching, the stress of Bobby's disappearance causes his mother, Leslie, to become really ill. And so most of the family has to return to their home in Opelousas, Louisiana. So Paul, who again had been the last adult to see Bobby alive, along with two other men, they stay behind and continue to search for him for a few more weeks. They never find Bobby, dead or alive, but what they did find was a single set of bare footprints leading toward a railroad bridge heading out of the swamp. At this point, searchers start to question if Bobby could have been kidnapped. So there's really two theories here. One is that a vagrant or traveler passing by on the tracks would have snatched him up, or it was speculated that someone in a small boat could have taken him through the lake and into the bayou. Again, it's like the early 1900s at this point, so I feel like this is kind of the golden age of like train hobos. So really, either of these things could have easily happened if he had wandered off from the group and like got next to the train tracks. By August 26th, then, it's just a few days after he's originally disappeared. The local authorities have been contacted, and then the police in New Orleans have been contacted as well. So they joined the search for Bobby. Basically, the New Orleans police are more invested in the theory that he was kidnapped, which kind of like lends validation to everyone that had latched onto those theories already. And so it seems like at this point, they do believe him to still be alive. So Percy Dunbar, again, Bobby's dad, he goes to New Orleans to distribute 700 copies of Bobby's picture and to talk with reporters. So then a detective agency also makes postcards with a picture and description of Bobby and mails it to town and county officials from as far as East Texas to Florida. Basically, they're canvassing like the entire southern United States looking for this kid. The description of Bobby that's on these cards reads, he's age 4 years old and 4 months, full size for his age, stout but not fat. He's got large, round blue eyes, light hair, very fair skin with rosy cheeks, and his left foot had been burned when he was a baby, and it shows a scar on the big toe, which is somewhat smaller than the big toe on the right foot. So he would also wear blue rompers and a straw hat with no shoes. So remember that foot detail. It becomes important later. The Dunbars, they have returned to their hometown in Opelousas, and this hometown really like kicked some ass and held out hope that Bobby was still alive. And together they contributed a combined $1,000 reward for any person or persons who would deliver Bobby to his parents alive with no questions asked. So in 1912, that's like a shitload of money. It's about $25,000 in today's money. Unfortunately, though, the money never lured any kidnappers from the shadows, and after 8 months with no signs of little Bobby, the reward money is returned to the townspeople who had donated, which sucks and is sad, but there is a light here at the end of the tunnel, because when after only 1 week after all the money's returned, the Dunbars finally get a lead. And so this is where things start to go from like tragic disappearance to like a weird mystery and possible like fucked up kidnapping. So in April of 1913, a note comes to alert the Dunbars that an old peddler named William Cantwell Walters had been spotted in a small town of Hub in southern Mississippi. William had a boy with him that strongly resembled Bobby, about the same age. However, when he had been seen, his foot had been too covered in dirt for anyone to really get a good look at it, to verify the description of Bobby on the postcards. Unfortunately for Walters, he didn't have time to get his story straight and had given authorities various and inconsistent answers about who the child actually belonged to, saying that it was his own kid, saying that it was his sister's kid, etc., just like making a bunch of stuff up. And eventually somebody on the street sees Walters whipping the kid, so they perform basically a citizen's arrest. They detain Walters and they're able to get a better look at the boy, and at this point they're like, hell yeah, we found little Bobby. Fuck this hobo. We are heroes. So the citizens of Hub then send photos to the Dunbars to prove his identity. The Dunbars, they receive the photos. They remain a little bit skeptical, which is fair. It's 1912. It's not like as if the photo quality is going to be great. But they receive these photos. They're like, yeah, okay, that could be him. So they travel to Mississippi to see him in person. And still, they're not sure if this is Bobby.
I mean, to be fair, a lot of white 4-year-old children, like, they look very similar.
Yeah.
Especially if they're generically have, like, you know, blue eyes, blonde hair.
Yeah, precisely. And, like, in a grainy 1912 photograph, you'd be like, maybe that could be him. The Dunbars, they arrive in Mississippi, and they check this kid to find out he also had a scar on his left foot, as well as a mole on his neck, approximately where Bobby had a mole. Keep in mind, he was 4, 8 months have passed, and kids at that age, they grow and change pretty quickly. But a mystery does linger here because the boy refused to answer to the name Bobby, and when Leslie tried to hold him, he refused to interact with her. Although that is sketchy, I have a hard time finding fault in this because, again, almost a year has passed. He's a small kid. If he had been kidnapped and if it was indeed Bobby, he could easily have had Stockholm Syndrome, not remembered his parents, been manipulated by the kidnapper. Like, I'm not going to fault him for that at all. After this initial meeting where people are just like, I don't know, is this my son? And Bobby's not too convinced either. They decide to come back to him the next day. Leslie asks to see him again, and this time she's able to get together with him and give him a bath. And at this point, she feels without any doubt that they had found Bobby. And she's obviously stoked and starts to yell, oh, thank God, it's my boy, before fainting again. I think Leslie maybe needs to go see a doctor because she seems like she is just getting overwhelmed and passing out a lot.
She got that hypoglycemia.
Meanwhile, as this is all unfolding, they're reuniting with the family. William Walters, the man who the boy was taken from, was insistent that the boy was not Bobby Dunbar, but in fact, he had gotten his story straight and that this was an entirely different boy named Bruce Anderson. Walters, he claims that the boy was the illegitimate son of his brother and then a woman named Julia Anderson, who was the caretaker for his elderly parents back home in Barnesville, North Carolina. To Julia's misfortune, she was at the time a single mom. She had 3 children with different dads. So at the time, this was like a big no-go. And in the day, like, this just basically leads people to be skeptical of her basically from the jump. Walters, he claims that Julia had given him the boy willingly, which Julia did confirm, though she disputed some of the details. And she was telling the reporters that Walters had left Barnesville, North Carolina with her son in February of 1912, saying that he only wanted to take the child for a few days to go to a visit to his sister's house. So he was going to go take the kid to go see his aunt. And from that day, she had not seen her child. Like, he took the kid and never came back. So basically, he had been gone for like 15 months when she'd only consented for him being gone for a couple days. People fairly are skeptical of Walter's story now that they know that this kid, one way or the other, it sounds like, whether it was his nephew or Bobby, had been kidnapped. They're skeptical that there was any consent given to take this kid, and at the time, kidnapping was a capital offense in Louisiana, so he could easily have said that Julia consented to give him the kid just to, like, avoid a kidnapping charge, because he would have ended up on the wall. Like, he would have been taken down to the gallows and strung up for stealing a kid.
This has real Casey Anthony vibes.
Mm-hmm. It does.
On their part.
It really does. He's in a tight spot because he's either on a trip with his nephew and Julia's lying, or he is accused by 2 families of kidnapping. So he either needs to prove his innocence and prove that Julia is full of shit, or needs to prove that he's not Bobby Dunbar. Eventually, though, like, that kind of is outstanding. We'll get back to it. But eventually, there's a newspaper in New Orleans that arranges to bring Julia to Mississippi so that she could meet then with the boy who is now thought to be Bobby Dunbar. And so she arrives there in May of 1913. So this is like a month after they've been reunited with the Dunbars, basically. Again, keep in mind that Julia is like, they're not giving her a lot of credibility back in the day just because of her, past with, multiple men. So she steps foot into the Dunbars' hometown where this boy is now living and doesn't have the home court advantage at all, essentially already on enemy territory, and the town has basically decided that the boy is Bobby Dunbar. Like, they're not going to listen to her at all. They're like, this boy is Bobby. Like, they made a huge spectacle of it. They drove this kid through town on fire engines covered in flowers, like a big homecoming parade. Unfortunately, when Julie gets there and meets the boy, he doesn't react well to her, which very much like the initial meeting with Leslie Dunbar. So I think he's just a kid, like, confused by what the fuck is happening. And just to put you in 5-year-old Bobby's shoes at this point, he had been maybe kidnapped a year ago, then reunited with either his real family or just a bunch of fucking strangers. And then these strangers take him in, they feed him, they bathe him, they give him a fucking pony and a bicycle. So this kid, he is now living large. This family is pretty well to do. And then Julia shows up. And so if Julia was actually his mother, can you really blame this kid for being like, Nah, I don't know her. Let me go ride my pony into the sunset. I have a bicycle and a nice cozy room. I'm not going with you, Julia. More about Julia. So she had been missing her son for even longer than the Dunbars. So it had been 15 months again since she had originally allowed Walters to take her son Bruce, and had never seen him after that point. So similar to Leslie, at first Julia has a hard time identifying the boy as her own son. But again, keep in mind, kids that young, they grow pretty quick. So their appearance wouldn't necessarily be exactly the same, especially after 15 months. Eventually, Julia says that in her mother's heart, she knows the boy is her son. However, unlike with Leslie, Anderson's initial, uncertainty isn't forgiven by people, and she's pretty much demonized for, again, having 3 kids by different men, and it's implied by the media that she is a prostitute. So just, really slandering her and discrediting her in any way possible. So other people's also, they call her illiterate, naive, and they also like to call attention to a suspect fact, which is she had lost all 3 of her children within just 1 year. The backstory on her kids is that she had to give her daughter up for adoption, and then she had a baby that had a sudden and kind of weird death that was wrongfully blamed on Julia. And then the cherry on top is that Bruce had gone missing. So, she was not winning any Mother of the Year awards at all by any means. As we can, rightly assume, the media is fucking brutal to this woman. And an article wrote that she had not seen her son since February of 1912 and that she had forgotten about him. And animals don't forget, but this big, coarse country woman several times a mother, she forgot. Eventually, authorities, they do step in, and there's a court-appointed arbiter that rules that the boy was the Dunbar's missing son rather than Julia's, of course, because, again, she's not on her home court. These people in this town don't trust her. She doesn't have money for a lawyer, and no allies in Opelousas at all. So basically, she's just fucked from the start. She eventually leaves town, and the boy was pretty much uncontestedly allowed to remain Bobby Dunbar. And then Mr. William Walters, he goes through a 2-week trial that was described as some by being sensationalized. He is convicted of kidnapping and then sentenced to life in prison. So he's actually not hung up. He is convicted of kidnapping. And then after just 2 years in jail, his verdict ends up being overturned on an appeal, and he was granted a new trial just based off of technicality. After the trial, Julia moves to a town in Mississippi to begin a new life. She ends up marrying someone, having 7 kids, and according to her descendants, she became a devout Christian, really turned her life around. And then she helped found a church that served as the nursing and midwife center for this small community. And her kids do say that her life was a pretty happy one, but they did say that, to her dying day, she says that she had a son that was kidnapped by the Dunbars. As for the boy, he grew up, lived his life as Bobby Dunbar. At the age of 18, he falls in love, gets married, they have 4 kids, and then he passes away in 1966, always believing until his dying day that he is Bobby Dunbar. But our story doesn't actually end there, because eventually DNA technology is invented and people start to get curious about what actually happened here. So fast forward, the year is 1999, Bobby Dunbar's just regular granddaughter, not great-granddaughter, but her name is Margaret. She starts to look deeper into her family's history. So she had always been pretty intrigued by the family legend of her grandfather's kidnapping, and then asks her grandmother to tell the story many times throughout the course of her childhood. It was then, a story she passes on, yada yada. So there's also a family scrapbook with over 400 articles about the Dunbar case that was given to Margaret by her father. And she basically says that the scrapbook is like a jigsaw puzzle without the picture on the box. So over the next few months, she tries to piece the story together of what actually happened. She's not completely convinced that her grandpa was indeed Bobby Dunbar. She sees these clippings and she starts to notice instantly that there's a lot of discrepancies in how the newspapers were reporting the events. For example, there's at least 2 different reported versions of Leslie and Bobby's reunion. One paper says that Leslie recognizes him immediately, while another described Leslie as unsure, even quoting Leslie as saying, "I don't know, I'm not too sure." She also finds that Percy and Leslie had originally told the papers that the boy didn't look like their son, and that his eyes were too small. Some newspapers reported, too, that Bobby didn't recognize his father, mother, or brother, and she was also kind of disturbed by reading a lot of the really biased accounts of Julia from the time. Clearly the media just like drug her through the mud, and Margaret's like, I don't know that she was given a fair shake. She eventually reaches out to Linda, who is the granddaughter of Julia, and Linda says that the family perception that all of them grew up with was that they had an uncle that had been taken by the Dunbar family in Opelousas, Louisiana. So they always knew that he had been kidnapped. Margaret, she like pretty obsessively continues this research, going through archives and courthouses. Eventually, the idea of testing her grandfather's DNA comes up, and her dad, Bobby Dunbar Jr., agrees to give the DNA sample to compare with a sample given by one of her great uncles, a son of Bobby's brother, Alonzo. So they're going to see if there's a familial connection there. This was a pretty controversial choice, and a lot of the Dunbar family were just like, leave the past alone, like, don't fuck around with it. And then Gerald Dunbar, one of Margaret's uncles, said no matter how the DNA test turns out, there's going to be a sense of lost. So, like, what is truly to be gained here? Which I would argue it wouldn't matter how the DNA turned out, because he still was raised with that family and, like, created a family with them. So, like, regardless of if he was blood or not, he's still family. It doesn't really matter.
You're still kin.
Yeah, you're still kin. And then it gives, you know, a sense of closure to the other family. When the test results come back, shockingly, or not so shockingly, the samples did not match, leaving Bobby's son, Bobby Jr., surprised. So he says that his intent was to prove that we were Dunbars, and the result didn't turn out that way. And so now he like went through a little bit of a tailspin, but he does eventually say that he would have done it again given the chance. So although this test proves that the boy was not in fact Bobby Dunbar, there doesn't seem to have been any tests administered to prove that he was Bruce Anderson. They all kind of just assume this boy was Bruce. They know the truth, so there's not really a point to do the DNA testing there. To this guy's dying day, he's like, I'm Bobby Dunbar. So it really wouldn't have mattered what the test had said. Like, he was still a Dunbar.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the end of our story, and it does settle the mystery of the boy, like his actual identity. But there is still the mystery of what happened to the real Bobby Dunbar. A lot of people, they still continue to believe that he was eaten by an animal like an alligator or a bear. There's still no evidence that was ever found. It's like clothing was never found, his hat. So some people still think that he was kidnapped. They just didn't find the right kidnapped boy.
I have some theories. One, Bobby Dunbar was taken by Sasquatch.
Yes.
That's it. We'll not elaborate. Two, okay, with the DNA, how do we know that Bobby Dunbar Jr. is Bobby Dunbar Sr.'s kid?
I guess I see what you're saying, though. Like, what if his mom was fucking around and...
Yeah, and it was not, you know, what if it wasn't his dad? So that's not really proving anything if Bobby Dunbar wasn't actually his dad.
That's true. That's very true. They should have done a test to see if he was Bruce Anderson, because if not, like, then that would open up a whole nother mystery can of worms. And who was mom? Which milkman was she fucking?
There's that theory. So let's say, hypothetically, what if, you know, Bobby Dunbar Jr. was not actually Bobby Dunbar Sr.'s son? Mm-hmm. My theory is that the dude who, like, kidnapped that lady's kid and then had Bobby Dunbar, he fucking, like, lost that kid or, you know, killed it or something. It sounds like, I don't know. There's just, in this story, there's a lot of dudes hanging out with small children that I just don't know that I
fully appreciate.
Yeah, like, across the board. Like, I can understand if it's, like, a slightly older teen or something, but when it's, like, an old man just has a fucking kid and is gone. Something bad probably happened to Bruce, and this guy found Bobby Dunbar just, like, walking along the way, and he's like, this kid, you know, it's a fucking 4-year-old kid. It looks kind of similar.
Yeah.
A 4-year-old white boy with blonde hair and blue eyes, like, because he was blonde, wasn't he, like, as a kid?
Yeah. Well, and, like, if you do look at the pictures of Bruce Anderson versus Bobby Dunbar, there is a difference in the facial features. I don't think they look like the same kid. Like, the dad, like they said in that article that they thought the eyes were smaller, it definitely looks like the eyes are smaller. So I feel like the Dunbars were either delusional and just really desperate to have their son back, so they were going to, like, make up any... They were just going to take a kid that looked like him and be like, yes, this is Bobby, but...
But also, as far as like children go, I mean, if you're looking at those pictures side by side, that's one thing. But if you're looking at pictures from before and then pictures now, it's like your eyes don't grow.
Mm-hmm.
So your eyes are going to look smaller as you get older.
Yeah,
You're going to
that's
have
true.
like.
Because, like we said, it was like almost a year passed between his original disappearance and then when Mom and Dad showed up to town and thought maybe his eyes look a little too small.
But I'm still firmly on the he was taken by Sasquatch.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. But yeah, should we get an end to tarot time?
Tarot time. Okay, so the first one I pulled is the Star. Very stunning. This is like renewal, like refreshment. Like she's washing off. She's having a nice little spa day. The next one I pulled is Eight of Wands reversed. So that is like mistakes were made. You're rejuvenating yourself from those mistakes. I also pulled the Five of Cups, which that is like acceptance, forgiveness of yourself. So like you might have made some mistakes, but like take a moment to self-care. Give yourself a little spa day. Forgive yourself. So coming out of your little self-care period, you're going to have some like cause for celebration, some kind of like happiness, a period of stability. But I'm just going to put these together because they both kind of mean the same thing. This is kind of like materialism and greed. So these are probably just saying, you know, give yourself some self-care, but don't go too crazy on the spending. You know, materialism isn't going to get you your long-term goals.
So, on that note, advice for today is enable your friends to buy mini brands, but like maybe don't enable them to do crack. And also, if you're watching a 4-year-old, don't take your eye off the 4-year-old. They'll get lost in the swamp. So, anything to add?
If you are out and you see a dude in a cloak, maybe don't approach him.
Yes.
Because you might get fucking assaulted.
You'll get
You might get your titties grabbed.
clammy claws on your titties. We don't want that.
Which, if that's your thing, we're not going to kink shame. We're not going to yuck your yum. Do it.
Yeah. But like if you don't want it, yeah, maybe that is your thing. Go to him willingly, but if it's not, avoid at all costs. But anyway, wrapping it up, guys, you know where to find us on our socials. It's in the description, in the box below, wherever you're watching your podcast, listening to your podcast, you can find it in our description. And if you're not sure where that is, you're smart, you can figure it out. We love you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.